Kia ora, my name is Kelsey. I'm the co-founder, CEO and creative director at Rascal. I'm going to do a quick plug and say we have a booth downstairs, so if you want to check us out, go down there. Today I'm going to be talking to you about storytelling, so let's kick things off. The first mobile game that I paid for was Monument Valley back in 2014 on my iPhone 5, the one with the little button. It was the first indie game that I had ever bought, and it came highly recommended from a friend. As a studying graphic designer at the time, I felt like it had been crafted specifically for me and for my phone. As a mobile game, I definitely wasn't expecting that almost every aspect of it had been informed and designed with storytelling in mind. Cinematically, using the camera to pan up, animating the typography for the title to reveal itself, I mean, it was before the Stranger Things that everyone knows. It was using cinema. Chapters that were laid out structurally like you would expect in a Wes Anderson film story title. And for those who haven't played Monument Valley, the game is pretty simple. Solve the puzzles, get Ida, our main protagonist, to the door or button, using a simple click or gesture, and then wait. As you, the player, we are in a state of pause and watch as the fate of our character unravels what's going to happen next. This team had truly considered how to immerse the player with the most fundamental storytelling question that drives all fiction. To quote author Neil Gaiman, and then what happened? So, just for comparison for this talk, 10 years later, I went to see what was the most downloaded application on the iOS store last month. And Block Blast. It came as no surprise to me that it was a match 3 game. And I mean, it doesn't really matter the name of the game, Candy Crush, Bejeweled, we all know the pattern matching game. And nothing that you see if you look through the plethora of these games, you could reasonably say has been made with storytelling in mind. All of them follow the same mechanic. Matching colours, shapes, items, characters, the challenge, beat your last high score, no end in sight, unlimited playtime, no complex narrative to unravel. Now, this isn't to say that match 3 games are awful or bad, or that they don't have a place in the market. Depending on how you measure success, Block Blast last month had 6.67 million downloads. And Candy Crush's freemium model boasts over $1 billion in revenue. It's very relevant for me to say, though, that Monument Valley 1 and 2 combined had over 80 million downloads. So I guess what I want to ask and what I want to maybe make you think about today is if you are making these hyper casual games and you don't have the ad spend to cut through, then what do you lead with? How can we make more Monument Valleys and not just fill the App Store with thousands of freemium hyper casual games? I think the best way to help us answer this is actually to turn to storytelling in film. 2 reasons stand out to me. Number 1, film has been around much longer than video games. Visual storytelling and ways in which, as we creators, organically turn to this medium from this visual format. And 2, I think we can better understand storytelling from the industry's past to inform how we could make something timeless, successful, both artistically and financially, in gaming. So I'm going to take you back all the way to the 1930s. I know it's a while. Otherwise known as the golden age of film. There was a French art film movement called New Wave, and it was characterised by the rejection of traditional filmmaking conventions in favour of experimentation. And the guy who sort of led the way was Jean Godard. Excuse my French. Now, he was a French and Swiss critic, director and screenwriter, and himself and a bunch of other individuals, namely his friends, came up with a manifesto and announced it because, you know, the internet didn't exist back then. where they specifically criticised French cinema's tradition of quality, which in Godard's eyes de-emphasised innovation and experimentation, basically telling traditional cinema world that they were unimaginative. And so Godard and friends started making these innovative films. And that's kind of how New Wave cinema was really born. It had a major, major, major influence on filmmaking and visual storytelling forever. And I'm going to take us through a little bit about that, because we can see how it's already blended organically into games and how we tell stories today. I have 4 major characteristics, and the first one is director-led and styled films. Now, before directors were on films named, they actually just had actors. And so it was really controversial to put the director to be credited for the work. And it meant that they became the primary creative, creating a visual style and aesthetic specific to them. The New Wave Manifesto was very adamant about having a director that creates work across the body of work that is identifiable. A modern example of this is Mr. Wes Anderson. Always fast-paced comedy, childhood loss, symmetrical compositions, consistent colour palettes, and highly stylised art direction. You know when you're watching Wes. And I kind of wanted to sideline here Sam Gill, who was doing a talk yesterday in room C, I think it was. He talked about narrative and storytelling blankets over everything, and he used the term narrative wrapper, and I really just love that. I think to explain that everything you design, including theme, tone, overall feeling, or as Sam called it, the vibe, is storytelling and is contributing to the narrative. Now, we can see this in games as well. I thought a studio that really showcased this idea of being identifiable across a body of work was Supergiant Games. Pierre, Bastien, and Hades, if you haven't played them, go check them out. Obviously, all the games are different, and it's not just their isometric design that makes them feel like a Supergiant game. Music, narrative, strong emphasis on character, and design all play into this. The second New Wave characteristic was low budget. Obviously, they were rascals at the time, and they had budget constraints. So things like the handycam technique, DIY camera rigs, kicked off an effect in the film itself that was attributed to the storytelling style, and kindly democratized it along the way, which is always good. A modern example of this is Everything Everywhere All at Once. Again, if you haven't seen it, definitely do it. Really creating this prospect that big studios are not always needed to make great cinema. This small budget film actually tells a story about an expansive multiverse with extremely complex visuals, only using some pretty basic visual effects and some help from some cheap free software for special effects. This was an Oscar-winning film. Excuse me, sorry. And to showcase this in gaming, we all should know Stardew Valley, developed by a single person for 4.5 years, with an extremely low budget. Stardew Valley is now one of the most well-known and beloved exponents of cozy game genre. The storytelling here is you get to unfold the town itself, the character, you get to meet the people, it's all in there. Over a 2-year period, I think it is. Our third characteristic was visual style, not to be mixed up with our last one. Very much against the more formal conventions at film in the time. So, for example, prior to New Wave, they would have studios and really fake lighting. They wouldn't have any natural light coming in from a window. And due to the low budgets, obviously, they started doing that. They filmed on carriages, they filmed in train stations, and they didn't use sets. They used real spaces, real people, not actors in shots. And in a more modern context, it's sort of resulted in a style and how we're so comfortable with seeing today. We don't really think about it much now. And Ladybug's a great example of this scene where the parent and child are yelling at each other. Yes, there might be a couple of internal lights, but I mean, for the primary, it's all natural. Much harder to show in games, however, I've tried my best. I think these film techniques have bled into the way that we tell stories, how we tell environments, how we use environments. Can we make them as realistic as possible? Can we bring in those natural contributing factors to the style? Our last one is experimentation in the edit. Again, I think we're so used to these things now, and at the time it was so dramatic, but a good example of this is voiceovers. Pre-New Wave film was sort of scripted as a linear story, and you followed these people as they walked through the set, and the story just played out. So editing and post-production, cuts, fast-paced cuts, jump cuts, music, montages to create a story for the character, this all came out of New Wave. And a classic one that Godard did was breaking the fourth wall. So he was one of the first cool kids on the block to do that. And really he was suspending disbelief that the audience was made very aware they were watching something that was constructed by an artist. They weren't watching a story play out. And I mean, I think, again, we just take this for granted because we're so used to it now, and anything from, you know, Marvel all the way back to the 1960s. And the best game, I think, that really showcases this a little, or I should say a lot, but not quite so visually, is the Stanley Parable, where basically, excuse me, it really highlights the relationship between the game creator and the player. And so your fate is determined on your decisions, and taking it one step further, putting you in that control, in that seat, to deny and to break that fourth wall. Basically, your narrator tells you to pick a door, or tells you what door you are going to pick, and you can pick the other one, and then he gets very mad about it. I won't break any endings for anyone who hasn't played it. It's great. So I think the big takeaway from New Wave is this idea of experimentation. And experimentation in storytelling doesn't rely on budget. It doesn't rely on the latest technology. It doesn't rely on AAA game graphics. Use what you have in the environments you have them and tell a bloody good story. It's absolutely unnecessary to have anything else. Classic caveman shot. Right. So I guess I don't really need to tell you that humans have been telling stories for a really long time. And I guess this sort of storytelling, whoever painted it was probably doing two things. One, these kinds of animals are in the area. And two, if you see two lots of animals running towards each other, please don't stand in between them. Silly idea. Storytelling feels like the most human of things that we do. And, oh, sorry, just loading. But what I do find fascinating is this question on why do we tell children's stories? Like, before they know anything about the world. Presumably when you tell someone a story, let's say, once upon a time, there was a chicken that crossed the road, you are assuming that that person has experienced a chicken, a road, how to cross a road. So why do we tell stories to children before they've experienced things, before they've experienced what the stories, the experience in the stories we're telling them about? Broadly speaking, I'm not going to go super into it, but broadly speaking, it's really to understand the chaos of life. So the stories that are told information before living or experiencing that, helping to shape and organise the chaos. I'm absolutely convinced that stories are a part of what it means to be human and at the very centre of what we're actually about. And so in 2021, when Rascal was tasked with producing 6 stories, I know there's 8 here, we ended up with 8. We were actually finally able to deep dive into showcasing and developing what we had been envisioning for the last 3 years, truly playing with this idea of what a playable and interactive story could look like. Just for a bit of context, this is what the market looks like today, still. When people, and when I say people, I mean the general public, people who don't game usually, maybe have an iPad, think of digital stories, games don't often come to mind or come into the picture for them at all. Even publishers for printed books don't believe storytelling in games exist. And so this work is possibly best described as interactive PDFs, mini videos with text, or mini puzzle language letter solving game things for kids. Our goal is not to make this. Our goal is not to teach people how to read or phonetics, and certainly not to collect points based on how many stories you read in the last week or month or year. And we are striving Rascal as a platform to host the next generation of new wave storytellers, breaking this mold about how stories can be played, how stories can be seen, and how stories could be read. We are just going to use us a bit of a reference here. We really kicked things off with traditional storytelling, tried to bring in what you would experience in a publication, feeling this beautiful, fantastic, real visual come to life, and bring those chaos-driven narratives from those stories. This is Little Blue Duck, by the way. Animators will run after you and kill you if you make them watercolour animate. They don't like that. Our narrative-wrapped game, truly, was Lair and Shadow, really referencing this comic book style. How can we bring things in differently? How can we engage the viewer with the text as it enters? And new wave film techniques. Looking at pacing, cuts, lighting, camera, continuously experimenting and innovating around how we could tell these stories differently. And as we continue to develop and explore, we're constantly reminding ourselves of what is a story, how can we better showcase this. To expand on Neil Gaiman's what happens next is what is story. The story is anything fictional that keeps you turning the pages and doesn't leave you feeling cheated at the end. Diving a little deeper, he explains that no matter what type of story you're telling, suspense is a valuable tool for keeping a reader, or in our case, a player's attention and interest. Suspense involves raising a major dramatic question that the player wants answered, usually based on a character's desire, and if it's not answered, the story won't feel complete. A great example of this is Lord of the Rings. Everyone knows Lord of the Rings. Driven by the viewer or reader, depends if you're reading the book or watching the movie. Will Frodo be able to return the ring to Mordor and defeat Sauron? Multiple subplots to engage throughout the story, but this central storyline is what touches all the others. And this, what is going to happen, or what's going to happen next, game drives forward any story. So I just thought I'd showcase what we've done and how our viewers and players respond. They are either staring grumpy zombies that don't really know what they're experiencing. They're fully engrossed and will not move. Or they're jamming out, which is great. He had the best time, love the soundtrack. So yeah, I'll reiterate one more time. You don't need a AAA budget, or the latest software, or the latest graphics. All you need is good storytelling. The future of gaming will absolutely require it. To make something memorable, it starts with the story. Thanks. Now, I just got told I have 10 minutes, but if anyone does have a question, apparently there's some time, no pressure. Also, just go head down, play a kid's story. We have free stickers. And genuinely, thank you for your time and sitting with me for the last 20 minutes.
When you have a story outline, how do you validate that it is a good story?
Great question. Specifically with us, we actually test it on kids, very specifically. Usually it goes through multiple people as well. So our story writer will come to us with it. We will work with them directly on whether or not we're feeling that it's good and getting somewhere. We have a pretty strict rule around 3 drafts. So by about draft 2, we're handing it out to either other writers or other creative directors, getting feedback on that. And then, by the time we've okayed it, usually we'll try and sit down with a kid and either read it to them, or if we get as far as a animatic, we'll showcase that to the kids. And they're brutally honest. They don't hold back. So it's very quick to know if the story's going to work or not.
Yeah, I have a question. So when you mentioned these writers, who are these writers who write for you?
So we specifically have been working with screenwriters, people who have come from film. We found that to be the most malleable, is maybe the best word to use, the people who could respond really well to this platform and to this idea. A lot of people in game writing got really stuck up on how they were going to respond, how anything was going to happen, and they weren't as focused on story, which was interesting. And then the other side of it was the publishing side. A lot of writers from kids' traditional publishing books really struggled with how do you move a camera and tell a story while things are moving, and like screenwriting. So we've worked really well with screenwriters, and honestly, that relationship is send me an email, reach out, and send me what you've done. Doesn't have to be kids related, and we'll keep in touch and make more things. But also, right now, we're licensing content that's already being made as well. So, it's kind of it's a juggle of both. Does that help? Any other questions?
Yes, so on one of your previous slides, you mentioned the definition of storytelling is primarily set within fictional narrative characters. Not to push back or disagree, but how would you apply this to...
I can push back to the screen, apparently.
Yeah.
Wait, which one was it?
This one.
This one?
Anything fictional.
Yeah.
That keeps turning the pages and doesn't leave you feeling she's at the end. I agree with that, minus the fictional part. Just makes it sound very objective to it has to be fictional. What about non-fictional elements? Would you be applying the same principles, theory, practice?
Yeah. I mean, I think in this case as well, due to using a lot of animation and being in games, there is always a fictional element in the sense that you aren't recording someone and so you have a fictional character that you've designed, and that might be based off reality, which is totally fine, but there is an element of fiction there. I think if we're going to talk about being real or taking from real life experiences, that I think bleeds more into this documentary sort of style for me.
Yeah, so real elements, but with embellishment, fictional additions, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And like helping sort of create story out of that, I guess, and leaning into that, being aware of it, I think is really important too.
Yeah.
You know, you're not dealing with reality, you're making something up, or there's a part of it that is fictional.
Yeah.
Does that help? I'm always up for discussion, by the way, I love that. Also can be told to be wrong. I'm still new. Oh, we got one more. Man, it's so good.
Hi, how do you come up with new ideas?
How do I come up with new ideas? Honestly, it's a collaboration. It's such a big team in regards to production. I don't know if you've seen film production at all, but a lot of the time, as the producer, I'm curating the ideas that come to me, and then once we've signed off on something, that usually begins to take its own life out of who's working on it. So something that was really pressing for us right at the beginning with these 6 stories was to make sure that all the teams were different, and we had different writers, we had different visual storytellers, we had different directors, because everyone brings a different flavour. And I think talking about directors directing, they bring their own type of storytelling to any story. And so, yeah, it sort of all just feeds in to the idea brainstorm and then gets very curated within that. So, yeah, just keep consuming. I play a lot of games and I watch a lot of film. I probably watch about 3 films a week, one of which would go to a movie theatre. So, yeah, and I think try and go to films that you normally, or play games that you wouldn't normally play. Because I think if you keep playing what you're used to and consume only that type of media, then you will only think within there. So hopefully, think of all the screens. There's so much out there, it's crazy. Awesome. Thanks guys so much. Appreciate you and your time.